Good evening from our State House studio in Montgomery. I'm Don Daly. In state government headlines tonight, some Alabama counties started issuing same-sex marriage licenses again today after the landmark U.S. Supreme Court ruling that legalized gay unions across the country. The decision had gay rights advocates celebrating and opponents calling it a sad day in the nation's history. Paul Hart of Montgomery filed the first lawsuit that challenged Alabama's ban on same-sex marriages. He called today's high court ruling monumental.
Never thought we'd see this in our lifetime. So this is a good day. This is a wonderful day for members of the community and for just civil liberties and rights that should have been any number of people's for so long.
Hart filed a lawsuit over death benefits for his late husband, David Fancher, who died in a car wreck shortly after their marriage in Massachusetts 4 years ago. He's been represented by attorneys with the Southern Poverty Law Center's LGBT Rights Project. Chinyere Azie is a staff attorney with the initiative.
Whenever we denigrate, members of our society, we denigrate our society at large. We're all in this together, and I think that our collective liberty is really what's at stake.
Paul Hart and Chinyere Azie will join us on the program shortly to talk more about today's Supreme Court decision. Governor Robert Bentley and Alabama Attorney General Luther Strange were among the state officials who expressed dismay today over the gay marriage ruling. Bentley said in a statement that he was disappointed that the justices disregarded the overwhelming vote of the Alabama people in passing a ban on same-sex marriages almost 10 years ago. The Attorney General said in a statement that the Supreme Court overturned centuries of tradition and that his focus would now turn to fighting for religious liberties for the state's citizens. Alabama Chief Justice Roy Moore has probably been the biggest crusader against the implementation of gay marriage in the state. In an interview with Capital Journal today, he said he was surprised and very disappointed with the High Court's ruling, and that even though some state probate judges had already started issuing same-sex marriage licenses again, the matter wasn't completely settled just yet.
Well, of course, that Supreme Court opinion doesn't even take effect till the time for rehearing has occurred, just like in our court, and that's 25 days. So until that time, the injunction issued by the Supreme Court of Alabama remains in full force and effect, and they will have to entertain that injunction and decide what to do with that in face of the Supreme Court ruling. And I'm sure the Supreme Court's going to act on that. I will not sit on that case because of my comments and because of my orders.
The Chief Justice will join us a little later in the broadcast to talk more about today's events. The Supreme Court this week also upheld a key provision of President Obama's Affordable Care Act. It ruled that federal subsidies used to help offset the cost of providing health insurance can continue in states that didn't set up their own insurance exchanges. Alabama was one of those states, and the ruling means that some 130,000 state residents can keep their subsidies. Burnell Mapp is CEO of Health Services Incorporated in Montgomery, one of the state navigators under the ACA.
When things go to the Supreme Court, you just don't know. It becomes the law of the land once the Supreme Court rules. And to see the Supreme Court and a majority vote come out in favor of these tax credits and sustain Obamacare in the way that it should be sustained, I think it's a great victory for the country. I think it's a great victory for those who need the coverage. I think it's a great victory for everybody that is interested in the well-being of our citizens.
Even though the nation's high court upheld the subsidy provision of the Affordable Care Act this week, supporters concede that other challenges lie ahead and that the battle to keep the law in effect will continue. Alabama Attorney General Luther Strange said today that he is appealing this week's circuit court ruling that would clear the way for the Victoryland Casino in Macon County to reopen. The judge cited the Equal Protection Clause in his ruling and pointed to similar Indian gaming facilities that continue to operate. Victoryland attorney Joe Espy told Capital Journal today that he was disappointed in the state's appeal, but very excited that momentum seems to be on his side.
We were elated. Had been waiting for the ruling to come. As you know, we tried the case in September. And the McGregor family, Victoryland, and the people of East Alabama are elated that finally we've got a decision that makes it clear that they have been mistreated and gives us an opportunity to reopen and put hopefully 2,500 people back to work.
The court ruling also stipulated some 1,600 gaming machines and $263,000 seized in a raid on Victoryland a couple of years ago would have to be returned. Governor Robert Bentley this week ordered all Confederate flags removed from the Capitol grounds. His move came in response to the murders of 9 people at a historic African-American church in Charleston, South Carolina. The suspect in those killings has been pictured posing with the flag, and that prompted a new outcry across the country. Governor Bentley on Wednesday quietly and unceremoniously had the flags removed from the Capitol grounds.
It has become a distraction all over the country right now. Off and on, it's always been a distraction. The Confederate flag was removed from the Capitol Dome around 1992, 1993. Had I been governor then, I would have done the same thing then.
The move to take the flags down didn't come without its detractors. Several gathered outside the state capitol this week as the banners were being removed, and they called it a sad day for them and supporters of history and heritage.
When you start removing the heritage of Confederate soldiers and our ancestors, I have 40 ancestors that fought, some are buried in mass graves, then eventually we're going to get mad and we're going to push back. You're not going to be allowed to have your history if we can't have ours.
We're not going against those that want to use this flag as their history and heritage. We support them on that. We stand with our fellow brothers and sisters on that. But you have others out there that don't believe that it's just for history and heritage. They use it for their ammunition.
The cause to remove the Confederate flags from the state capitol is one that has been championed for many years by State Representative Alvin Holmes of Montgomery. He led the effort that saw the flag taken down from atop the Capitol Dome in the 1990s and was prepared to offer a legislative resolution to remove all others. He says such a measure is now unnecessary, but he believes it would have passed.
There are certain members of the House of Representatives that would have gone berserk when I introduced the resolution. Now, I think the majority of the members, both black and white, would have accepted it, but you got some hard, cold left-wingers up there in the House of Representatives that don't think I ought to be in the legislature and don't think no black ought to be in the legislature, and we would have had trouble with them on that resolution.
Representative Holmes will join us a little later in the program to talk more about this week's removal of the Confederate flag from the Capitol grounds. There are actually 5 Confederate flags, but 2 of them usually get the most attention. In our in-depth report tonight, Capitol Journal's Karen Brown sat down with Eva Newman with the Little White House of the Confederacy to talk about all of the controversy.
It's our responsibility to teach and explain the things that history has taught us.
Those things include the Confederate flags. This week, the 4 flags were removed from the Capitol grounds. Newman explains the meanings of the 2 most prominent. The government flag
that represents the nation of the Confederacy, the stars and bars. On it, it has the 7 original states that seceded.
She likens this flag to the U.S. flag, which represents the 50 states. The second is the military flag.
The battle flag has the 11 states, plus Kentucky and Missouri, who were neutral, and they were added to have 13 stars to represent the 13 original colonies. The battle flag rallied the troops to battle when the war between the states erupted.
Newman notes that revenue from slavery was at the heart of the war, but she condemns the flag's misuse.
When the KK and the skinheads and other groups used that flag for their purpose of terror, cruelty, misunderstanding, and statements such as segregation now, tomorrow, and forever, are we not teaching hate with that flag? The flag doesn't speak. The flag is a piece of history. God created man in his image. Love is respect, and we have to respect all of God's creation.
For Capitol Journal, I'm Karen Brown.
State officials announced this week that Google plans to build a $600 million data center in Stevenson, which is in Jackson County in northeast Alabama. It'll utilize TVA's former Widows Creek power plant facility and will bring with it up to 100 jobs to the area. The project is the first recruited under Alabama's specialized data center incentives passed in 2012, as well as the Alabama Jobs Act. Construction on the Google facility is expected to start in 2016. Meantime, Hyundai said this week that it will begin work on a new automotive assembly plant this year, and reports said Alabama is still in the running to land the facility. South Korea's Yonhap news agency quoted a source close to Hyundai as saying that Alabama is one of the candidate states competing for the SUV production plant. All of this good economic news comes as Alabama's job market continues to improve. It's something state officials are very excited about. Capitol Journal's Randy Scott takes a closer look tonight.
Like the summer heat, attention to Alabama's economy and job market is rising.
We are doing really, really good this year.
Auburn University at Montgomery's professor Dr. Kayvon Daravi says Alabama's economy and job market have improved in 5 years, creating over 33,000 new jobs in the first half of 2015. But
our problem is that we have lost so many jobs and the recovery has been so slow that we have a long way to go. That means that we need many months of 33,000 on average jobs growth.
A challenge Fitzgerald Washington is glad to accept.
It's encouraging for the economy. I think the employers understand that we're on a pretty nice trajectory with the economy, and so with that, they're hiring more people.
Washington is the commissioner of Alabama's Department of Labor. His agency works to keep Alabamians working by helping find new jobs.
We're at 34,800 jobs in just 5 months in 2015. So that's exciting news for everybody.
Washington says the process includes educating citizens of job opportunities available to them.
We're going out and taking our resources to, say, counties that have high unemployment, to take our service to them, because we as an agency just can't sit back and assume that, number one, that job seekers know about these resources that we have to offer. We also want to make sure that they have access to our resources.
For Capitol Journal, I'm Randy Scott.
Stay in touch with Capitol Journal online, on Facebook, and on Twitter. You can also contact us by email at ddaily@aptv.org or by mail.
Next up on the broadcast, today's U.S. Supreme Court decision which legalized same-sex marriage in all 50 states is our topic. Two special guests join us in studio today. Paul Hard is a Montgomery resident who filed the first lawsuit that challenged our marriage laws in the state of Alabama. Paul, welcome to Capitol Journal.
Thank you for having me.
Also with us today is Chinyere Azie, who is a staff attorney with the LGBT Rights Project with the Southern Poverty Law Center. Chinyere, welcome to Capitol Journal.
Thank you.
Paul, I'll begin with you. This must be an emotional day for you.
Oh, incredibly. I was glued to my iPad. I was actually administering a test at the university where I work, and was watching the news feed as the results were coming in from the Supreme Court. I had to excuse myself from the room for just a moment and go down the hall and kind of give a rebel yell in the stairwell of the university. And actually teared up. Actually, my student was getting up leaving. She said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I'm fine. We just had great news here today."
Indeed.
And the scene downtown, a group of us came down to celebrate in front of the probate court, and we're so excited. It was just a wonderful scene.
Paul, I'm going to remind folks of your story. You married your late husband, David Fancher, in Massachusetts, and what year was that?
That was May the 20th of 2011.
So I know this must be a bittersweet day that he did not live to see this day with you.
Yes, it is. We were married for about a month and a half before his fatal automobile accident. And he, I imagine, would be very, very pleased to see this day. And I had friends that were texting me earlier and saying they imagine that he's in heaven celebrating with us today.
Marriage equality is what this has been all about for you and those who have supported same-sex marriage for a number of years. Of course, same-sex marriage has its detractors, but when you speak to them about what this day means to you, what do you tell them?
Very often I start with any of the indignities, any of the injustices that I suffered after David died. none of them would impose upon me. None of them would want me any harm. It's entirely possible for them to adhere to their definition and understanding of marriage, and at the same time be willing to issue me civil rights and grant me civil liberties that are guaranteed to any couple. If Britney Spears got married for 5 minutes in a Las Vegas wedding by Elvis, she would have every legal right and every legal protection that our laws afford, even if that was a sham of a marriage. And I've known same-sex couples that have been together for 30 years that have, up until this point, had no legal protections at all.
Paul, a lot of people thought the U.S. Supreme Court might wait until Monday to issue its ruling, but surprise, they issued it today, Friday, and there is significance, is there not, in issuing it when they did, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yesterday, by interesting coincidence, the pride flag was first flown in San Francisco a few years back. But today's date is the anniversary of Lawrence versus Texas, and also the repeal of DOMA back just a few years ago.
DOMA, of course, being the Defensive Marriage Act.
Absolutely.
So today is significant on many, many levels.
Absolutely. Really big.
Chinyere, I want to hear a little bit about the LGBT Rights Project at the Southern Poverty Law Center. Tell us what that's all about.
We are a subgroup of the Southern Poverty Law Center that's dedicated to advancing the rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender individuals who are living in the Southeast, as well as other parts of the country.
A day to celebrate for your organization today?
It certainly is. We view the Supreme Court's decision today as reaffirming that members of the LGBT community live lives that are valuable and that are entitled to dignity, under the law.
Were you surprised with the ruling?
I will say that for many of us, this was a day that was long awaited, but we were hoping that this would be the result. We think that the Constitution does afford, protections to members of this community, and so we're glad the Supreme Court agreed.
Now, I mentioned at the outset, Chinyere, that Paul filed the first lawsuit in the state of Alabama which challenged our marriage laws, and the Southern Poverty Law Center has helped represent him in this case. And while he can't talk specifics, I know you can talk about generalities of the case. It essentially deals with his late husband's death. And after his death, because Alabama didn't recognize their marriage, he could not receive death benefits from his late husband.
That's correct. Paul was unable to be recognized as a surviving spouse. He was denied that right in the middle of his grief. And so our lawsuit was filed to, as a preliminary matter, get him recognition on the death certificate that his husband was issued, to be recognized as the widower, and now to collect some surviving death benefits that were being denied up until now.
That's kind of illustrative, don't you think, of this issue in a bigger picture, because those rights that same-sex couples enjoy and might take for granted really come to bear when you look at same-sex couples who did not have all of those rights.
That's absolutely correct. Members of our community up till now have had trouble, going to visit their partners in the hospital if they're in an accident. That was something that Paul experienced that was very painful, not being allowed to be by his husband's side, on his deathbed. It's also something that inhibits people from being able to have recognition with respect to their parenting relationships. So it might be the case that, there's a two-parent household and only one of the parents is recognized as the mother or the father of a child. And so every day, members of our community have had to navigate really a web of laws, that just deny them recognition. And there was one comment that came across my Facebook feed from someone who's in the community who for years has been carrying a USB drive in her wallet that just indicates, for instance, that she has had a second parent adoption, that she is married, in a given state to her partner, and just has always been living in fear that she'll enter the, cross the state line and enter the wrong place, and all those rights disappear.
Mm-hmm. Paul, when you married David in 2011, you came back to Alabama to live where your marriage was not recognized. Was that a challenging decision to make?
We considered living other places that were more accepting, at least as in terms of the political and legal climate. But Alabama's home. It's home to both of us, and it's where our families are and have been. We were both natives of Alabama. We love the people here. We love the state. People very often, teasingly around the country when I would meet them, and they would know me to be the Alabama plaintiff, would say, "Why haven't you moved? Why are you living in Alabama?" Because Alabama's home, and for all of the detractions, there's a lot of good in our state that is worth staying here for, and it was a thought, but. This is home. This is where we wanted to make our home.
Well, at the same time, did you think in 2011 that this day would ever come?
One of my students, when asked about this, is it going to happen, said maybe when I die. And this is one of my students who's in their 20s. And so we wondered. And in fact, standing in front of the courthouse, me and one of the other folks were saying, never thought we'd see this in our lifetime. So this is a good day. This is a wonderful day for members of the community, and for just civil liberties and rights that should have been any number of people's for so long.
I want to go back to something you said at the outset, David. You were talking about you were outside probate court today in Montgomery, celebrating with others after the ruling came out. Could you kind of set the mood for us, what it was like there?
It was. This was the place that if you were hug deficient, this was the place to go. We were. There were a group of us that had said, regardless of how the outcome of the case, we were going to be out in front of the courthouse to celebrate, and if any couples did come to see if they could receive their marriage license, that we'd be there to support them. And so there was a lot of hugging, a lot of handshaking, people driving by from the downtown community that were honking their horns and indicating support of us. So it was a really good day, a very jubilant one.
Chinyere, I can't help but notice your shirt, and for those of our viewers who don't realize what it says y'all means all. Tell us about that philosophy.
I think it's really simple, and it's just that, members of the LGBT community are members of the society at large. We're Alabamians, we come from all over, and we want to participate fully in the communities that we're a part of. And, LGBT rights, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender rights are not, they're everyone's issue. It is about civil rights and civil liberties and just being able to be treated with dignity.
There have been some who have called this an extension of the modern Civil Rights Day movement. And while the tracks are very different, say from the civil rights struggles of African Americans during the 1950s and 60s, there are some parallels. Would you agree?
I would agree. And I think that's not to say that everyone faces the same sorts of challenges or oppressions, but I think that today's been a really great day that is rooted in Loving v. Virginia, and that is rooted in so many decisions that have recognized that whenever we denigrate, members of our society, we denigrate our society at large. We're all in this together, and I think that our collective liberty is really what's at stake.
The critics would say that this is a horrible day for our society and our culture at large. Is it easy to answer those critics?
I think so. I think that even in the Bible, you have this idea that God is love and that love prevails. And I don't think that anyone, whether it's Roy Moore down the street or, folks who are coming onto this issue for the first time should view the ability of two people that love each other to sort of profess that love publicly and raise a family and build a foundation, that's a tragedy, for anyone. It's really just an affirmation of what our society is capable of, I think, in terms of recognizing the dignity of man.
Paul, I heard someone say something recently, tell me if you agree with this, that even those who find themselves very much removed from the gay rights movement, the marriage equality movement, they probably know someone is gay, they probably work with someone who's gay, whether they realize it or not, and so this does affect them maybe more than they realize.
It's rather like I tell students, I teach counseling at Auburn Montgomery, and I tell my students, never tell the universe who you're not going to work with because the universe has a way of bringing those people to your door. I had a good friend some years ago that didn't know me any better, and he said, I just don't think that I could work with a gay man. Actually, he was bench pressing, and I was holding the weights over his head, and I looked down at him and said, are you sure? And the fact of the matter is that, yes, you know someone, maybe you don't know that you know them, but everybody knows someone or has some connection to the LGBT community. And it's one thing to pull a lever at a voting box and say, I want to stand for traditional marriage. You don't realize sometimes when you do that, that what you're doing is also taking a stand against people, and you're endorsing discrimination and harm to them. Many of the folks that did that would never endorse discrimination or harm. They just thought of themselves as taking a stand for their personal beliefs. I respect that, but do those personal beliefs intrude themselves into the civil and political process? When someone is requesting, when they are wanting to be recognized for their civil rights, does that mean that someone else's religious views should impinge upon that? Mm-hmm. And I think that you can have your religious views and at the same time extend civil rights to other people.
Chinyere, we've heard from people like Governor Robert Bentley today and the Attorney General Luther Strange, among others, who have all pointed to the constitutional amendment that was overwhelmingly approved by Alabama voters back in the early 2000s. Which defined marriage as being between a man and a woman. And the contention is being that will of the people, that vote, is being trampled on today by the U.S. Supreme Court.
You know, what I think is really significant about the U.S. Constitution is that it protects against what is often phrased as the tyranny of the majority. You know, it's not about sort of the will of the people in a given moment. That's not necessarily what prevails. It's these overriding principles of fairness, principles of anti-discrimination, and those are often viewed as more important than, for instance, what a particular group has to say. And that's exactly how this movement does relate to the civil rights movement as it transpired 50 years ago. You know, it wasn't necessarily popular, you know, when Brown v. Board happened, you know, the idea of anti-segregation, but the point is that the views of the people weren't the deciding vote. It was really just what the Constitution requires.
Yeah. I was thinking while you were talking about that, I was in grade school when the schools were desegregated in my town in West Alabama. And I remember as a kid, all of the adults around me saying, we should be allowed to vote on this. The Supreme Court did not allow a popular vote on people's civil rights back then, and shouldn't allow a vote on people's civil rights now. If it comes to the majority, when would we extend civil rights to people that we disapprove of? It's not going to happen, and that's not the way that our court system works.
Chinyere, State Representative Patricia Todd, who obviously has been a tireless advocate for marriage equality and who has been on this show previously a couple of times, said something very memorable in an interview on this show once. She said that just because the majority voted for something doesn't make it right. If majority always ruled, as she put it during that interview, slavery might still exist, for instance.
I couldn't agree more, and I think that Paul hit it right on the head. You know, we don't put people's civil rights up to a vote. It really is about abiding principles of justice, and again, that's what the Constitution enshrines and what it requires, and I think the Supreme Court absolutely affirmed today that it extends equally to racial minorities and to minorities who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender.
The Southern Poverty Law Center's LGBT Rights Project, your work continues, does it not? Because there's still work to be done here.
There's a lot of work to be done. We have problems today, you know, regarding employment discrimination. You can get married on Sunday and fired on Monday still in Alabama, and so our work definitely isn't done.
There are housing issues, there's second parent adoption issues. There's a lot of things that are going to have to be worked out as a result of today's ruling, right?
That's also correct. There's definitely going to be a lot of work to still do. You know, we haven't necessarily seen an indication yet that all of the probate offices in Alabama are going to begin issuing marriage licenses. So there's a lot of work to do, but I think today we celebrate.
It's a great celebration. And to reflect on what you just said, I've had members of the community that have come to me and literally said, yesterday my landlady stopped by for coffee and she was asking me about finding someone in my life and when am I going to find a nice man, and the lady said, well, I'm looking for a lady, not a man. And she felt like that she was in a supportive environment where she could say that, and not an hour later showed up with an eviction notice. And this is very real. This very much does happen in our state, and so the job's not done. It's just starting. It's just a good starting point.
Finally, Paul, I know that your suit is still pending, but this is a monumental day, would you say?
Absolutely. This is a tremendous day.